Welcome everybody to today's webinar, Renewable Energy Deals. We're just going to give it a few more minutes just to wait for a few more people to come online. Everyone's logging in. So what we'll do is we'll just go silent for a few minutes and we'll be back online in a couple of minutes to get started with today's webinar. Thanks everybody.
This conference is now being recorded.
Thank you everybody for your patience. We'll get started now. So welcome to today's Renewable Power Deals. Today we're going to go through a few examples of what we're doing, but to get started we'll do introductions. So I'll start with myself. I'm Matthew van der Linden, founder and director of Flow Power. I've been working in the industry for over 20 years. Yes, and very passionate about trying to change this market. So I'll start with David to give us a brief introduction. Hi everyone, I'm David Evans. I'm Director of Projects and Engineering, and my focus is about implementing these PPAs with our customers in general, and also getting the customers connected to the market. And we also have Stephen here.
Good afternoon everyone, I'm Stephen. I'm a recent journey to Flow Power business. I'm in business development, helping Matthew and David with their supply. And speaking to renewable generators and delivering that to our customers.
Thanks, guys. So, Stephen and David, please, as we move through, feel free to step in at any time, and we'll get through this. So today's webinar will take about 30 minutes or so. We'll have about 10 minutes at the end for questions. So you'll see on the web page there a little chat box. You can type in your questions as you go. So you can do that at any time. And as we get to the end, we'll try to get through as many of those questions as we can. If you have any issues with the system, just I think there's help on the screen there that you should be able to call Redback Conferencing if you have any major problems. So we'll get started with the process. So Flow Power, we are a licensed electricity retailer operating in the NEM in Australia, but we're a bit of a different retailer. We're a wholesale electricity retailer. What we mean by that is all the same tools that your typical large retailer would use to buy your energy, we offer all those same tools to you as a consumer. So what that means is you get access to the spot market, which many people are probably familiar with, but also financial products like derivatives and hedges, and also now large-scale corporate PPAs and any of the tools that a typical retailer would use to manage their load, we give you directly. So we're very transparent. You see our margins and what we get and all those sorts of things. So it's quite a different model. So today we're going to look at to talk a little bit about the power market and how it's changed, because there are some very dramatic changes occurring in the market today. We're also going to go through and just explain our corporate PPAs and provide a bit of an example and try and get through the questions. Over the years, obviously, we came from a market that was, large coal-fired power stations built by essentially government. I guess that era, you might argue, is coming to an end with Hazelwood's closure most recently. And we've seen a dramatic step up in price. There's a lot of talk about Liddell trying to keep it open and others trying to close it. I guess the reality is that the market has changed, and you can already see as of today, that little blue curve there, we've got a very large amount of variable generation now. It's a very different type of generation to the rest of the market that's in the market. And that's beginning to change how everything works. So over here, you've now got a significant portion of wind and solar. Now, over the next few years, that's going to go up significantly. We've got a huge quantity of wind and solar coming online. So that's all coming into the market. And one of the big things is trying to get access for corporates to get access to this new wind and solar, because it is very cheap and not have it locked away. So this is the challenge. So as we move forward right now, most of the wind and solar that has come into the market has been bought up by the large retailers, and it is significantly below what most consumers are paying in the market, but no one is seeing that. It's very much been locked away in large scale in the large retailers' portfolios, and consumers can't access it. And it is so cheap, you'll see that as we go through this, that it's well worth accessing. It's not as clean as a fixed rate contract in that it's variable, but that variability is really a minor issue when you look at the price in the market today. So we're just going to talk briefly about why these projects and why this works. I'll just briefly talk about the business side of it. And then we'll talk about why the renewable projects want it. But from a business point of view, obviously it's huge savings. That's the first and foremost driver, is those very significant savings. But you also find improved brand. So we've got customers that signed up into our first deal with Ararat Farm. They now own a chunk of the Ararat Farm, and that's the way they view it. And they're publicly announcing that. And you also get reduced carbon emissions. And the LGC price, that's also a very significant component to it. You're securing much lower prices. You also, the other aspect that you're locking in is you're locking in, you're disconnecting yourself from the wholesale market. So everyone's always been on the roller coaster ride of renewing their contracts every 1, 2 or 3 years, and you have to take what the market gives you. These renewable PPAs gives you that capability just to disconnect yourself from the market for that load that comes from the renewable source. So that bit will remain fixed for the next 10 years, and that's a huge advantage. And
I'd like to add to that from my previous experience being a project financier in the renewable space in Australia. There are a lot of projects out in the market that's being developed, and they're looking for a home. And there's a very strong role for an off-taker like Flow Power to be that bridge that connects these projects as an off-taker to the businesses. So there's considerable opportunity there to deliver value to the businesses, and we are speaking to quite a number of renewable projects right now to deliver a bankable solution to the market.
Okay, so I think this is my section here. So I'm going to explain a little bit more about how corporate PPAs work. So in essence, a PPA is a power purchase agreement. It's a contract between 2 or more parties to buy electricity from a generator. That generator, generally in the context of this presentation, is a renewable generator, but it does also extend to other forms of generation in the market. In essence, there are a number of ways in which that customer can connect to that generator, either directly through a financial instrument or via the retailer as is the case and the examples that we'll be providing throughout this presentation. There are obviously pros and cons to different methods, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in the coming slides. But essentially, a PPA is a contractual agreement to buy electricity at an agreed price for an agreed term from a generator. Next slide. So one of the confusions out there is, or there's a lot of confusion, I guess, in terms of the different terminologies and different types of PPAs that exist in the market. And we see lots of different terminology being thrown around in terms of how PPAs are named. And they also, in turn, have different formats in the way in which the energy is either physically delivered to the customer, virtually delivered, or whether it's a financial transaction. So in essence, the focus of today's presentation is really on the off-site or large-scale PPAs, but just to touch on what an on-site PPA, I'm sure most people on this call, on this presentation, are familiar with the concept of on-site solar. So it's taking that theme and actually having a solar plant on a customer's site where, rather than the customer owning that particular generator, they may instead buy the power output or generation output from that plant. And they would do that under a power purchase agreement. So a third party may own and operate that particular asset on a customer's site and sell the energy back to them. Versus an off-site, or sometimes referred to in front of meter, where customer is buying a share of the generation output from a large scale, usually utility scale solar or wind project, of which they're able to access economies of scale and generally lower cost of generation. And these are generally longer term structured agreements for periods of 7 or more years. And the types of structures that a customer can enter into with these generators are generally one of two types. They're either financial based, in which there's a financial instrument or a financial agreement between the generator and the customer, which may not have no correlation to the actual customer's consumption, or an energy-based solution, in which is the one we're going to talk about in more detail throughout this presentation, where the customer is actually offsetting their usage through renewable generation or from the solar or wind project. So just to give you an example of how that might look practically, often we find for a customer, when we're looking at what types of renewable generation suit their consumption best, it may not be that a particular generator is the best fit for a customer. It may actually be a blend of different generators. So a good example of that is where we use wind and solar, which often have complementary profiles. So in this way, we can give the customer more cover or offset more of their consumption from the market with renewable generation. The balance of load or balance of consumption from a customer can then be sourced from the wholesale market. And as Matthew alluded to, that includes various tools that can be added on to deal with the shortfall of consumption when the generation from renewable sources is not blowing or the sun's not shining, in the case of wind and solar. So there are a number of ways in which we can structure these arrangements, but suffice to say, the ability to be able to mix and match and blend in different types of combinations allows us to, as closely as possible, supply a generation mix which is closely aligned to the customer's consumption. And the importance of this really is we're trying to give the customer an offset of their, or reduce the amount of energy they would have to buy through the market, and for that period of consumption from the generator, we're essentially trying to fix their costs at the agreed PPA price. Just a final note on that, the PPAs can also deal with any customers who have on-site generation. So it might be that some of your generation is supplied through on-site solar, and some is also supplied virtually through the NEM from wind.
And this is all really compatible. Like there's no real choice here. You do what you can in the right areas to get the best outcome, don't we?
Exactly. So there's some analysis piece of work that goes into, which Stephen's going to provide an example of for an actual customer. But there's some analysis that goes into our mixing of renewable generations, and different types of generators have different types of profiles, particularly in the case of wind, that may be better, more or less better suited to particular customer profiles.
Yeah, and the other thing is, it's not. You mentioned how it's about matching the customer's load. You take a bit from each location to try and match their load as best we can. But the other thing to also consider, it's also maybe we take a little bit from 2 different wind farms and 2 different solar plants, and also try to reduce the risk of the variability out of those plants by having diversification. Still match their load, but diversify across 4 or 5 plants. And that's also part of what we look at when we're trying to select the projects as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a great point, and I think also adding to that, if a customer situation changes over time, they of course can add on different forms and additional amounts of generation from different projects over time as well. So it's reasonably flexible in that you can obviously add to it as required, and change that mix as different things change throughout the consumption pattern from the customer.
Yeah.
I think that's it from me. So I think we're going to hand it over to Stephen to just talk us through an actual example.
Yeah. So thanks, David. So David and Matthew just highlighted the flow power solution and some of the features of our product and the service we deliver to customers. So let's put it into context of a real example. We have George, one of our customers. He runs a factory, he's in manufacturing. His main reason for being is to make sure that he delivers to his manufacturing customer base. Energy is obviously a major contributor to his cost base and his labor energy, but he doesn't necessarily want to spend his better part of his days and working hours finding different sorts of energy solutions because he wants to run his business in his day job. So, he's recently just come off contract and of a retail contract, and he was very surprised to realize that he had little control over his energy costs, because obviously his retail bill has increased. So this case study is really typical of the clients that we receive, and how we actually run them through the value proposition to get them through to the end stage. So the first thing from our perspective is to demystify for George what all this business about renewable energy means to a company like him, because he's obviously bombarded with an alphabet soup of terminology, as David explained, whether that's virtual, sleeve, direct, synthetic, or behind the meter. So our main job was to make sure that we simplify the terminology for him, but also explain to him that what he sees in the headlines, the big corporates like Telstra, Coca-Cola, and what you see on the page, Olam has also done something with low power, that he can also get a share of that pie and that value. So the first thing we do was to make sure that we understood what his energy needs were. And
it really doesn't have to be complicated at all, and that's probably one of the big things we bring to this whole story, is to try and make this very simple, like signing another retail contract.
Absolutely right. So the first step we do, as we do with all our customers, is really to understand what their energy needs are. So the first step is to look at George's energy consumption patterns, and then through our resources, try and match his load with our supply base, whether that's wind or solar, as best as possible. So we realized that George's consumption patterns mostly happen throughout the day, but we also had some consumption left and right of that. So to tap into our supply source, we found a solution that involved both wind farm output as well as solar output that best matched his generation profile. And in particular, this made sense to him because what he was looking for is a renewable energy solution that delivered a profile that could meet his consumption patterns. As David mentioned earlier on, there's a difference between a financial product and an energy-based solution. as you can see, from the very starting point, we are offering and we're going down the energy-based solution because we're trying to match his load as much as possible. This is something that the customers really appreciate.
You can see on those charts there that you've got the George's profile on the white one, and then you've got the what a typical solar profile would be and a typical wind profile. And you see that none of them match, but we'll show you how we make that work.
To the next slide. So when we did the analysis, because we could source renewable energy projects in his various loads in different states, we found that nearly 90% of George's power can be sourced through a mix of wind and solar. And through our optimization platform, we devised a solution that was greater than 50% wind and about 40% solar. And that allowed those renewable generation sources to very closely match his consumption patterns. There will be some overs and unders, and I think as Matthew and David highlighted, we're very much provide a retail solution, but we're also very much an energy management company. So we provide George also with additional tools to manage his overs and unders. And as a result of that, George is now very much engaged into the energy market, and his skills and sophistication has also increased in that regard. So what this means is we're going down an energy partner sort of a model, and that's the model we're developing with our corporate. Obviously, the key point is, what is the value delivered from the renewable energy source, and that's where the earlier chart we demonstrated that the cost of renewable energy versus where the energy prices are at the moment. We're trying to deliver that delta to George as much as possible, and we were able to deliver him a much cheaper rate than what he was getting from the retail market, as well as giving him some certainty, and this is where the hedging part comes in, over 10 years to hedge his costs so that he can manage his business on a more certain basis. And of course, this doesn't mean that he's locked into this energy consumption for the next 10 years. As George's consumption grows, we can also grow with him and supplying him with more renewable energy, as David explained earlier on.
So, just before you move on, this chart's trying to sort of just demonstrate, because obviously wind and solar are very variable. It never matches perfectly, but when you do it properly and you get that matching working well, the actual bit that's not matched is very small, and it actually isn't that material in terms of your final outcome. And that's what this is trying to show us here. You can see that dot. This bit is still exposed, and the solar slightly overproduced through this period here, so it went back to market. This bit was still had to be purchased from the market. But, in this particular example, it was only 2% exported and 10% had to be imported. So essentially, keep going, David.
So essentially what Stephen was referring to in that terminology is overs and unders.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's the over and unders, what I've just pointed out. But it's not a big component. It's quite small.
Yeah. And it's probably worthwhile explaining in the same way that a customer who had a solar plant on their site would sell the excess back to the market or back to the grid, and any shortfall of their consumption, of course, is purchased from their retailer. So this works at a very similar process, except the energy is supplied virtually through the market rather than physically through a cable.
Yeah. And we would overlay the behind-the-meter solar onto these charts to work out the best outcome as well. Try and take everything into account.
Which is a good into the summary chart. So based on our analysis, and we sat down with George here, we estimated the savings could be, relative to what it was on before, up to 35% in energy costs. That's a pretty good guide in terms of what value our model does deliver to a customer like George. But of course, as David mentioned and Matthew explained, there are some overs and unders. And as the energy management partner side of our business, we help George to optimize that as much as possible. So that could be in terms of demand response. On the side, we do have some customers where they participate in various programs where they can earn additional income whether that's load shedding or otherwise. There's also, engineering solutions where we can integrate this model with the PPA together with their behind-the-meter solar and or even backup generators. So there's a raft of things as an energy partner we deliver together with this corporate PPA. But the main message from this slide and all the slides beforehand is that for a typical corporate like George's manufacturing company, the look through to the renewable energy delivers immediate savings, and then we deliver additional tools as an energy partner to enable them to optimize around that. And this chart is basically illustrating what they will typically see in a retail contract on the side, where the value is completely taken mostly by the retailers, versus the model on the left where we try and deliver and optimize that value for the customer as much as possible.
And you've also got the other huge thing with this is he's entered this contract and his price now stays the same for 10 years. It's not at the whim of the market now. And that's actually a huge bonus for when you're running a business. You actually be able to sort of say, I know I've gone and contracted with essentially the hardware that produces the energy. So therefore I know I've got a real cost that's at the lowest point in the market, and I'm going to be stuck there for the next 10 years. And that's a great thing, because you, rather than being at the whim of what the market's willing to do, which will always be somewhere above the physical cost of the electricity, maybe short term it might go low, but on a long term it will always be above, and you're taking out all that profit that goes to the retailers and giving that advantage yourself. So it's and you're taking out all that profit that goes to the retailers and giving that advantage yourself. So it's that's actually a huge thing that the market's not used to. They've always been on this 1, 2, or 3 year cycle of doing whatever the market prices at. So that's a big change.
And just one last point on that. I think as the customer grows and as our customer base grows as well, our access to renewable energy sources will grow with that as well. So as the cost curve for renewable energy comes down, we will continuously be able to supply an updated, more an efficient renewable sources and deliver that to our customers. So in summary, so this slide here effectively just ran through the life cycle of a process to deliver the value to the customer. So in summary, it's an energy-based solution. So our starting point is always about what the corporate requires in terms of its consumption, how much of that can be delivered and matched through renewable sources, which we will provide a look through for the customer, and we then determine the structure that best suits that customer, whether that is more wind, less solar, more solar, less wind, or even a combination of wind, solar with our energy management solutions, whether that's behind the meter, demand management, and other services. Once we devise a solution that best fits the customer, then we discuss what terms and horizons that the customer wants to actually hedge effectively. And as we mentioned in this presentation, our customers are very comfortable locking in value for the 7 to 10 year period. And what that means is, we can demonstrate clear value and deliver a better price than what they were receiving from the retail market, and that was represented in that 30 to 40% savings previously explained. So
Sorry.
Go ahead, David, please.
Sorry, so just to add to that, I mean, the process that we went through last year when signing customers to Ararat, we had to obviously discover what type of structures were going to work best for corporates, and we obviously experimented and looked at different types of arrangements, financial and energy-based, and through that process we were able to discover or land on what was the best fit for the customer in terms of what provided the most value through to them. And I think that's an important point when sort of summarising the PPAs, and again going back to there being such a lot of different terminology and a number of different ways that these can be provided. But essentially the one that we landed on ultimately was one that we felt that was going to give the customer the best value out of the renewable generation, and that could also be reasonably flexible
in terms of being able to change how the balance of energy is delivered to that customer over time. Yeah, just a quick point there. Thanks, David. So next steps is what we're up to.
The message there is that if renewable energy is of interest, and you require a little bit of explanation and to demystify what the structure actually looks like and how we can actually deliver value, we'll be more than happy to have a chat. And I think we've highlighted the case study and the process in which we start from your needs, and from there we can devise a solution with a corporate PPA that may suit your needs. And yeah, so I think that takes us to the next section, which is Q&A.
Yeah, so please bring your questions forward. We've got a few questions already coming through, so we'll start to look at those. But just as we're going through this, one thing, because we're working in this market every day in terms of we see the prices, we know where we're at. But one thing we actually haven't really highlighted so strongly is the disparity between the actual price that's coming out of these renewable projects and what people are often paying. So just as a brief example, it's not something you can take me to the bank on, but the Q1 Victorian price was 14 cents a kilowatt hour as we entered into Q1. And everybody knows that, well, the LRET market, the green certificate market, was at about 8 cents. So you add those two things together and you end up at 22 cents. Is roughly what the market was paying for the energy. And just to give you a bit of broad scope, and the output from these renewable generators is coming through at about somewhere between, depending on whether it's wind and solar and the term that you take it on, it varies based on all those factors, but it's somewhere between, it could be 6, 8 or 10 cents or something like that. So it's literally half the cost of the energy price that was being paid for in Q1. So it's actually a very important point because it's a massive difference. It's huge. You obviously have to fit it to your profile, and you've got to get the right term and all the rest of it, and you've got to deal with variability. But it's a very significant saving. Some of you would already be very familiar with that, but I just thought it was worth highlighting. So one of the questions just on that topic, someone's just actually asked a question there, basically asking us, is it prudent to set up the PPA with that 2% over? So we're probably talking about that chart that we had just before. David, do you want to have a go at answering that?
Sure. The answer is no, not at all. There's no requirement to buy a minimum or maximum amount. You can essentially assign as much or as little renewable energy to your purchasing strategy as you want. So some customers will be driven by different criteria. So some may have a requirement to use LGCs for offsetting carbon. Others will want to use the low energy cost to obviously offset reduce their overall energy prices. Generally speaking, we provide a solution that will get that as high as you can without providing too much oversupply, and by that I mean having a large amount of unused generation. We try to optimise that at the right mix of generation to cover as much of the customer's profile as we can without obviously oversupplying. So the 2% is just an example of an actual customer, but it can vary considerably. So there's no specific requirement there. Yeah, and probably I'm not sure the context of the question fully, but you're sort of asking if it's prudent. So obviously we try to match their load as best we can and minimise the amount they import and the amount they export. But the thing is, if that import or export's only in a 10% range, you'll exposed, I guess, to the changes in the market like you currently already are. But because it's only a small percentage of your load, even if that market doubled, the overall impact on your cost base is very, very small still, because it's only doubling a small percentage of your load. So you try to minimise it because you don't want to be exposed to the market anymore. But no, a 2%, a 10%, and even a 15-20% import-export outcome is quite low risk, because you've got to also remember that it gets offset by that's 2% export, you've got import as well. So if the market's expensive, you're getting more on the export. And it's, even though the import's costing you more as well. So the two things sort of balance each other out. But no, we do try to reduce that as much as we can. So we've got another question here. Where does Flow Power get the solar and wind energy from? Do you own multiple renewable energy sites, or are you procuring that energy from a third party? So I'll actually just ask Stephen to answer that one.
Yeah, so our key strategy right now is as an off-taker, and what that means is we transact with renewable generation sources. So what we do, there's obviously plenty coming into the market. So one of our key focal points around securing supply is working with partners that can deliver both solar and wind to our customer load. And what that means is that that requires a level of due diligence on those projects. And not all projects are created equal, certainly, and certainly not all projects match perfectly to our customer load. So there's a level of project selection, and to answer the question directly, the primary role there is as off-taker. Obviously, probably in the mid and long term, we don't rule out owning our own generation, but the primary goal right now is to make sure that we select the right projects that suits our customer base.
We're very keen on finding projects that are delivering very soon. And that's what our app did, actually. It was already online, and customers could sign up and get an immediate benefit. Those customers that did sign up had pretty impressive January, February, March bills in terms of they were about half the market cost. Something pretty amazing. So another question I've got here is, how long are you locked in for in a PPA? David, do you want to have a go at that?
Sure. The general term in the market is about 10 years, and that's driven by the project finances behind the renewable generation projects. So that essentially what they're doing is looking for revenue certainty for a term, and that term is normally a minimum of 10 years. And in exchange, obviously, they're providing energy at a significant discount to the current market, and providing obviously the customer with price certainty. So yeah, generally as a rule, most projects are looking for a 10-year term as a guide.
Okay, thanks. There's a lot of questions coming through. I'm trying to get through them all. Someone's just asked me to re-explain those costs that I mentioned before. So the costs I was quoting were energy costs. They didn't include network. I said that I was actually quoting market costs from the ASX futures, which is what I often use as a proxy to what the retail market's doing. You can look up the ASX energy futures market on the web, and you'll see the prices that come through there. And I quoted 14 cents for retail, 8 cents for certificate price, giving a total price of 22. It's just representative of what the market's paying for energy at the moment. It may not directly reflect what you're seeing on your bill, but if you give us a call, we can take you through more examples of where that comes from and how that works. Someone's asked about what about seasonal changes to use, and that's actually a good question. So I'll actually give that to David to answer.
Thanks, Matthew. So obviously there's both seasonal changes on the generation profile as well as and in some cases also the customer's profile. So again, this is an important part of matching the generation portfolio, or the types and locations of generation that we actually would recommend a customer. And we discover that through the modelling process. We look at the different scenarios of the generation profiles overlaid with the customer's consumption to work out what effect those seasonal changes actually have. And then that flows into the overall purchasing strategy and what we do with the balance of supply or any excess generation. So it's a good question, and it's essentially very bespoke to each customer, which is why we undertake some analysis for every customer that is looking at entering a PPA agreement or a purchase agreement from a renewable generator. Suffice to say that those things are considered certainly and taken into account in the overall picture, and we provide a range of outcomes based on different scenarios that the customer could expect from that strategy.
Next question is, your analysis indicates what is an optimum investment. Can your analysis indicate what is an optimum investment in on-site solar? It says you have to cover the overs.
combined with a flow power renewable supply. So, David, do you want to give that one a go?
Yeah, sure. So the short answer is yes, absolutely. We can look at an on-site solution as well as off-site, or if a customer already is or has considering putting their own on-site generation solution, which may also not necessarily include just solar. It could be other forms like biomass, biogas, or diesel or gas-fired generation that they may, or bio, other types of generation that could be they're looking to install on their site. So our modelling can consider those types of generation in the overall procurement strategy. And a good example of that is where a customer has, say, on-site solar, and we would look to potentially balance that out with some wind from a off-site wind generator. And generally we find that, when the match is right, it provides a good overall coverage for that particular customer. So again, it's about finding the right mix and looking at what that generation profile looks like on the customer's site versus the generation profile of any other wind or solar generator that we're looking at. It definitely we definitely do and can include it in the overall strategy.
Yeah, and we would encourage it to be looked at because it can be cost effective because we obviously get the network tariff offset as well. But often there's often complications. You often can't fit enough on the roof, or there's problems with the roof, or you don't own the building. That's one of the advantages of those corporate PPAs. It's fully transportable between sites as well, which is a bonus.
Yeah, I think a good differentiator there, Matthew, is that with your off-site large scale, apart from the fact that you're accessing what is generally economies of scale and low-cost generation and very complex and very well-structured debt financing that allows them to generate very cheaply. Apart from the price alone, you're also not taking generation risk of a project that you might have on site where you have to maintain and operate it. Those things are managed by the operations of the plant itself. You only pay for the generation when it occurs.
It's very true, isn't it? The corporate PPA model that we've set up is so much simpler in terms of getting it through.
And essentially no upfront investment, or very little upfront investment, depending on what security the project requires.
Yeah, I often give the example of one of our customers that signed on. I think it took them about 2 or 3 weeks to go from not knowing what we were offering to signing a corporate PPA with our wind farm, which is pretty phenomenal. And they were only a small user; they weren't a large user. And that is one of our philosophies. Actually, is we don't want to just offer this to your huge corporates. We're trying to make this a whole of market thing for even the smaller businesses to be able to use. Having said that, we do have limitations. We can't go down to your very small businesses just yet, but we are working on it. Someone today, I think that gives you the discount. And there's a lot of questions still now. So please, if you've got any questions, give us a call at the office. We've got a team of people here who can help you out and take you through it. We know that there's a bit involved in this, and we are ready to try and help you through this process. So just thanks to David and Stephen, and I think if I can just say to us locally, we did very well because me and Stephen are in Sydney, David's in Melbourne. I think we coordinated our efforts fairly well today. So, but thanks for listening today, and yeah, give us a call and we can start to look to get things moving forward.
Thanks, everyone.